And we are live from the Dayton Hamvention. This is year 2011. Now, we may not be here next year. They say 2012 is coming, and that's going to be that. Our goose is cooked. Now, this is kind of an interesting situation I've got here. Do you want to aid me with the mics here, because I don't know which ones are any of these on.
Someone sit down there. There you go.
Okay, we have individual volume controls for each microphone. So, this gentleman here is attempting to get the headphones free, and I'm going to let him introduce himself. He can't hear.
Loud.
Okay.
Good. Gotcha.
Okay. He's not quite loud enough, though.
Hello there.
Now he needs a little boost.
Hey, folks.
In the gain department.
Hello there.
A little bit more.
Hey, testing 1, 2, 3. There we go. How you doing?
Yeah.
Hi, Ted.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm Bob Allison, WB1GCM, and I'm the test engineer at the ARRL laboratory, right at the ARRL headquarters in Newington. Hello to all the listeners of WBCQ on 7415 and 9330. Oh, can I say hello to somebody?
No.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
I want to say hello to Tim Tron, and I also want to say hello to Marion Webster and Christina, and I think they have a cat named Electra. I'd like to say hello to them. Their radio show is pretty funny.
Hey, why don't you go ahead and plug Marion's Attic? That is one of the most unusual radio shows that is on air. And, I'll tell you, radio today, for the most part, is pretty boring, including our show. But if you tune into this thing, I mean,
there's an old lady plays really old records, and a younger woman, and they're very funny together and very, very unusual. So I thought I just want to say hello in case they're listening.
Well, I guess a lot of those songs are on 78 RPM records, are they not?
And they play cylinder records too.
Well, I know they play cylinders. I hadn't got there yet, but yeah. I was going to say that they play cylinders, but they also have a whole bunch of 78 RPM records.
I understand, yes.
Yeah. I remember 78s when I was a kid.
Yeah, me too.
because they were so brittle, and if you dropped one, they would just shatter.
A lot of times, yeah.
There were so many times you would drop old 78, and it was like,
that was the end of it. Even if it said unbreakable, they'd still break, or they'd fall on top of a lamp or in the radiator, and they'd melt, and then that'd be the end of them.
Do you recall changing needles on a 78 RPM record player? In other words, they had these stainless steel needles.
But you'd flip over.
And they would wear down. No. I'm talking about little straight needles that went up inside and there's like a little screw that held them in there.
Oh, yeah.
They were stainless steel, and they would wear down.
Oh,
You'd have to take them out and put another one in.
Well, I remember Marion saying something that you have to change a needle with every record, something like that. But I had an old machine like a Victrola when I was a kid, but I never knew about changing needles, so I always thought the phonograph sounded just bad all the time.
Well, now there were those that had crystal cartridge pickups, and they had ceramic.
Ceramic, yep.
And they had little needles that would flip over.
That's right.
One side was for 78. You'd flip it. The other side was for 45, 33.
And 16.
Yeah. And I guess I came to the conclusion, I don't really know for sure that there was any difference in the stylus. I mean, supposedly there was, but...
Well, I think there's a groove dimension's different.
Well, you would think so, but I could never hear any difference. I mean, I used to play with it, flip it, and play the song, and flip it, and play it again.
Well, I never had that good of a phonograph anyway when I was a kid.
Well, I remember... Now you want to get into some dating. I remember the very first stereo cartridge that I ever had in a stereo, home stereo. It was a ceramic, and it was a Sonotone 9T, a little gold ceramic cartridge. And the first magnetic cartridges I ever heard was in a radio station. And I remember they put the tone arm on the record, and as soon as they dropped the tone arm on the record, I was absolutely amazed at how clear it was as compared to a ceramic cartridge.
Yep.
So anyways, we really wore that out. Is there anybody still listening?
Sure. Well, let me tell you what I'm doing here at the...
Yes, tell me
here.
I walked by it, and in the glass case it said, what, AMSAT 1? Is that what it was?
Oh, that's one of the things. I have a booth I'm running here. I'm the test engineer at the ARL laboratory. And for the past 3 years, we've had a kit building exhibition where people sit down and choose from a couple of kits they can sit down, put together. We teach them how to use hand tools, how to solder, how to follow instructions. That's the hard part. And just sort of mentor them along the way. So people that have never built a kit before can sit down and do it. Ages 9 through 90 participate. But in front of my booth, I have a special exhibit, and that is of Oscar 1. And Oscar 1 was the first amateur radio satellite that went up into space. And it was put up on December 12th, 1961. It sent the word hi in Morse code on 145 megahertz on CW. And it had a telemetry to let people know how hot it got, because the higher the temperature went inside the little satellite, which is about a foot square, the higher the temperature went, the faster it sent the word hi in Morse code. And that's how they determined the temperature of the spacecraft. It was also the first non-military payload that had ever gone up in space. And right now it's operating, for anybody that might be listening to WBCQ, it's operating on 14508, although it's under Part 15, so it doesn't have to identify. It's sending the word hi just as it did 50 years ago.
Okay, if it's operating under Part 15, my question is how much power does it put out?
Microwatts. It doesn't probably even make it over to this side of the arena. Maybe about halfway down this large room that we're in.
So, 100 milliwatts, tenth of a watt?
You're looking at less than a milliwatt.
Less than a milliwatt?
Less than a milliwatt, yes.
So how is it that you, that seems impossible.
Well,
it seems like that, in other words, I understand a tenth of a watt or something like that you can hear. Like you put a signal on the radio that's a tenth of a watt in a quarter of a mile.
Certainly. Well, I should sort of clarify that today we have a 50 ohm resistor, essentially a dummy load, on the output of Oscar 1. Originally, it had 140 milliwatts of output power, which was enough to pick up, transmit, through clear space to ground, if you're within the illumination of the satellite.
So, in other words, the way this works is you have an infinitesimal amount of power can actually
just for here, yep.
Can actually from space
140 milliwatts from space is plenty of power
to be heard in an entire hemisphere.
Not an entire hemisphere, but because it was such a low Earth orbit, the diameter of the illumination was probably a couple thousand miles.
So, in other words, wherever the footprint was,
yeah, you could hear it.
You could hear it,
definitely.
That's just amazing. And I guess now, but you think about XM and Sirius are up there.
Yep.
I don't know how much power they run. They run a lot of power, though. A considerable amount.
I don't think so. It's digital, too, and they can cut the power way down on that. But this particular Oscar, I just want to mention, was one of the original prototypes. It was built along with the one that went up in space, and we were very lucky to get a hold of Lance Skinner, who was one of the original builders of Oscar 1, who actually built it for a sum of $68. And it was built in his garage, and it went up on this rocket. And I'll tell you a really kind of a cool story about this, is that this particular bird was, the schematic diagram, for instance, was published in QST incorrectly. And that's so the Russians couldn't get a hold of it and kind of reverse engineer it. Also, two of the circuit boards that are in our prototype are actually incorrect. They were built incorrectly. So people couldn't take a picture of it and reverse engineer the keyer board and the timing board. So it's kind of interesting that it was purposely built wrong to misinform people. And the rocket that was featured on January 1962's QST was the wrong rocket. It actually went up on a Thor Agena rocket because the Thor Agena rocket was actually carrying a spy satellite at the time. So they didn't want to know what rocket went up. It was carried on.
We did an interview with a lady Her name is, I think, Marie Esnault. And she talked about her husband being one of the pioneers in the satellite program. Does that ring any bells to you?
I'd have to go back and look at the literature that we have on our table, because that's not one of the names that rings the bell to me, but I haven't memorized. There were actually 6 individuals that worked on Oscar 1.
Okay,
that actually built it. But Lance Skinner was one of the main people, and we were able to contact him, and he provided all the information, which was extremely helpful.
Well, I recall her telling this story, and part of the story got into President Kennedy, and I'm not sure how it all fit together, but she talked extensively about it, and it was interesting to hear. The whole concept of the thing was interesting to hear.
And by the way, an Oscar 1 was the first non-military payload that went in space, too.
Now, how many amateur satellites are circling the globe right now?
Well, we've lost a few. I would say a few dozen. A few dozen. Some only transmit telemetry. Some transmit only data. There's a couple that work with a 2-meter and 70-centimeter dual-band radio. If you have a dual-band radio and a very small portable dual-band antenna, such as the Arrow dual-bander, you can, and you know where the satellite's going to be with satellite tracking programs, you can actually very easily go through satellites using FM handy-talkies. So that to me is really, really fascinating.
Well, see, that was the other thing I was going to ask about, because I was thinking with that little amount of power needed, okay, and with that is why then is it you couldn't work a satellite with an HT, and you're saying you can?
Oh, most certainly. In fact, the satellites coming back are only running hundreds of milliwatts. They're running low power.
Okay, now, what kind of transceiver would you need to do this with? I mean, would a standard dual-band HT do this, or?
Yes.
Okay.
And some are called full duplex handy-talkies. There's an Alinco one, the DJG7. I actually wrote the review for that particular handy-talkie for QST magazine. Not only did I get to test it in the laboratory, but I also got to review the radio. And part of the review was I was determined to make a 2-way radio satellite communication QSO with this handy-talkie and the Arrow antenna, and I did. Worked out from Newington to Ohio using just a handy-talkie and the antenna. The best part about a full duplex antenna is you can hear yourself coming back. And sometimes that's handy, but make sure you have a pair of headphones on, otherwise you can cause like a feedback loop.
I guess the other thing I was going to ask about is, you said the Arrow antenna. So in other words, when you're doing satellite communication, you're not doing that with a rubber duck on an HT.
It's really hard to do, and unfortunately, there are people that have done it with a rubber duck, but there are many people that try to access this one channel as it goes overhead. It's Oscar 27 and Oscar, I think it's 51. You need the gain to sort of override other people that are trying to get into it at the same time. So, as you know, with FM, the loudest signal wins. So if you have a directional array, you'll be heard over someone that's just has a rubber duck. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it does work. A lot of users that want to use it.
But now this is what you're talking about, though, is a handheld directional array. It's not.
Yep.
It's not.
Oh yeah.
Mounted. Now, of course, there's guys that get into this thing that have Yagis stacked up, and they're all driven by motors. And
that is kind of overkill. You don't need that much actually, but it does help. Yes, you'll get through better than someone with a rubber duck or a small handheld Yagis, a dual band Yagi, by the way.
Okay, now let me ask you this: Have you ever done any moon bounce?
No, although back in about 1980, when I first got onto 2 meters, I had 2 11-element Yagis on 2-meter FM. And there was one time where I let go of the mic, and I heard myself identify. And I thought, who's playing a recording? And then it dawned on me. I said, where's the moon? And I was using 100 watts at the time and 2 11-element Yagis. And I said, where's the moon? I ran outside, and I could see the antenna was pointed right at the moon, and I heard myself come back again. And the only other experience I've had, interestingly enough, it was end of January of 2008, that HARP transmitter up in Alaska was doing an experiment where they were shooting up energy just below the 40-meter band and just above the 40-meter band, and they were on like 6.9 something megahertz, and they'd send a carrier, and then they'd go silent, and then you could hear the reflection come back. So I've actually heard